The idea that Maleficent was so angered by not being invited to a christening that she decided to curse the innocent baby has always seemed a bit silly when you think about it. It just always seemed like there was more to the story than what Disney gave fans with Sleeping Beauty. Thankfully, since the animated classic was released in 1959, there have been a ton of stories and movies since that have added a lot of depth to characters like Maleficent and Queen Leia. And let's face it, they were already pretty solid characters. One of the most interesting things to come out of these side stories, though, would have to be a fan theory that describes a tragic situation the king and queen faced, a tragedy that left them no choice but to ask the Dark Fairy for help. In fact, this theory originated from a very small and overlooked detail from the beginning of Sleeping Beauty that might reveal the tragic truth behind Sleeping Beauty's connection to Maleficent. It came from a single line that was actually within the first two sentences of the movie. As the Sleeping Beauty storybook opened up, the narrator can be heard reading, "In a faraway land long ago lived a king and his fair queen. Many years had they longed for a child, and finally their wish was granted." The line that really stood out in that intro was the suggestion that Queen Leia and her husband had wanted to have a child together for many years, and it's what led some fans to speculate that there was a specific reason why the king and queen went so long wanting a child but not having one. Something way more tragic than anything Disney had pressed on before. You see, according to this theory, Queen Leia and her husband waited so long to have a child for many years because they were unable to get pregnant. This, of course, would be a heartbreaking addition to the story, but it's something that's entirely plausible. First, according to Sleeping Beauty, the king and queen had wanted to have a child for many years, and though they don't specify how many years exactly, they most likely meant throughout their entire marriage. And since they were, in fact, married, there is a very good chance that they didn't keep it PG and were actively trying to have a baby. However, after years of trying, for some reason, they were unable to get pregnant due to some underlying health condition. And before you go thinking the conception issues would be out of line for a Disney movie, statistically speaking, it's actually perfectly in line. They just never outright mention it. You see, according to reports, 1 in 5 women who are unable to get pregnant after a year of trying tend to have some sort of fertility issues. That's 20% of women. And there's no special statistic for royalty, which means Queen Leia could have been affected just like everyone else. And sadly, according to this sad theory, that led to a deep-cutting tragedy in the king and queen's life. To make things even worse, the loss that Queen Leia would face if this theory is true actually resulted in the king and queen actively seeking out help from a very powerful dark force. And it stems back to the very beginning of Sleeping Beauty when the narrator is introducing the story. In the same sentence that they explained that the king and queen wanted a child for many years, the narrator claimed that their wish was granted. In other words, after years of not being able to have a child together, the king and queen just miraculously got pregnant with their daughter Aurora. As Disney as that sounds, that just doesn't add up. But for the sake of this theory, say that there was no magic involved in the conception of Aurora. Considering the king and queen's history of trying and not being able to have children, there's a disturbing chance that Queen Leia wouldn't have been able to survive through the entire pregnancy. And according to this theory, that's exactly what happened. At some point during her seemingly miraculous pregnancy, it's been speculated that Queen Leia lost the baby. And if that's true, that really is heartbreaking. According to this theory, though, that wasn't the end of the story, since Aurora clearly was alive as a baby. Instead, it's believed that this dark tragedy led Queen Leia to seek out help from one of the most powerful magic users that she knew, Maleficent. The Dark Fairy was one of the most powerful villains in Disney history, and she is without a doubt a fan-favorite character. Because the Queen knew that Maleficent wasn't afraid of the dark side of magic, she knew that the Horned Fairy would be interested in helping out. She just didn't know if the villain would be willing to or not. Interestingly enough, though, according to this theory, Maleficent was indeed willing to help save the life of the child that the King and Queen had lost. Now, in case that seems a bit out of character for the Wicked Fairy, there are actually two different reasons why Maleficent was willing to help Queen Leia and her husband. The first is based on what was learned during the live-action Maleficent movie. According to the villainous origin story, while she was still a fairy with wings, Maleficent actually had a relationship with King Stefan, who at the time was just the prince. This means that he knew about Maleficent's magical powers, and he also knew that she had a strange and terrifying darkness within her. Granted, he sort of just judged a book by its cover in that movie and used his charm to lead Maleficent on so that he could hurt her. In the movie, Prince Stefan was shown to be the person who stole Maleficent's wings, which which make it seem odd that he and his wife would turn to the Dark Fairy for help. However, according to this theory, the king and queen would have known that they had very few options left, and in order to save their child, Queen Leia would have to ask Maleficent for help. It would be the only way to fix the tragedy that supposedly befell the royal family. Interestingly enough, the second reason Maleficent would choose to help them is because of speculation that Queen Leia and Maleficent were secretly sisters. Now, that would be cool, though there might need to be a bit more evidence to substantiate that claim. Although it's hard to deny that the queen did seem oddly comfortable around Maleficent when she crashed the christening. While the rest of the guests were horrified, Queen Leia seemed calm and collected. On top of that, their character designs are fairly similar in terms of their height and the shapes of their faces. Whether that's true or not is still up for debate, but if this theory is correct, and Queen Leia lost the child that she was miraculously pregnant with, she and the king needed all the help they could get. And no matter what the relationship between Maleficent and Queen Leia was, there is no doubt that they would have known about each other through the prince who dated Maleficent but was now the king. And because they would have a clear idea about how powerful the fairy was, plus the fact that she wasn't one to shy away from the darkness that would be required to save a soul from death, they knew that they had to ask for Maleficent's help. According to this theory, Maleficent was willing to help save baby Aurora's life. So, despite the tragic fact that Queen Leia lost her child, she and her husband managed to get Aurora back thanks to the help of the Dark Fairy, who would end up cursing the child at her christening shortly after. There's actually another point of view that supports this theory that came from a novel written about Maleficent's origin story. You see, according to the book Mistress of All Evil, A Tale of the Dark Fairy by Serena Valentino, which follows the origin story of Maleficent and adds more details to her Sleeping Beauty storyline, Maleficent had a strong connection with Aurora. In the book, Aurora was actually a baby that Maleficent created through the use of magic. However, after realizing that she wouldn't be capable of loving her own child, she decided to give her to the king and queen to take care of. This actually fits in quite nicely with the theory about Queen Leia having tragically lost her child, because Maleficent might have given Aurora to Queen Leia and King Stefan knowing they couldn't have a child on their own or had tragically lost one previously. One of the best parts about the idea of Maleficent helping out Queen Leia and her husband is that it adds a bit more of an explanation to the Dark Fairy's angry reaction to not being invited to Aurora's christening. And as mentioned before, her reaction has always seemed to be the one thing about Maleficent's character that seemed a bit flat. However, if she had helped the royal family by saving Aurora's life after Queen Leia had lost her during the pregnancy, then it would add a stronger connection between Maleficent and the baby. When you look at it that way, to be the only person in the entire kingdom to not be invited would seem very personal indeed. In a way, this would explain such a harsh reaction from Maleficent, who immediately resorted to causing a huge scene and eventually threatening the child. Interestingly enough, the possible connection between Aurora and Maleficent that this theory poses could also explain why the Dark Fairy would curse the baby to face an eternal slumber rather than just outright kill them. As horrible as that would have been, if Maleficent was truly evil and angry, that would likely be the route that she took, unless she had a personal connection with Aurora. And that connection was formed when she saved Aurora's life after Queen Leia almost tragically lost her during pregnancy. What do you think, though? Does the idea that Maleficent helped Queen Leia after she had lost her baby sound plausible to you? Or do you think there's another reason that the Dark Fairy was so upset that she hadn't been invited to Aurora's christening? Make sure you let me know in the comments below.